The years, many niche card games have come and died, but sometimes, and only sometimes, one may come back to life. After several years of being dead and buried, a game about magical girls seems to be making a comeback with a new product release under new ownership and management. So today, we must judge and decide whether a game can make the hard crawl out of the grave and stick the landing on its second go around. This will be my thoughts on the rebirth of the Caster Chronicles. The original Caster Chronicles was launched in 2017 by the same company that launched the Force of Will card game years earlier. Similar to Bandai, Force of Will was trying to expand beyond its original title and into newer games to keep up with the TCG boom at the time. This was around the 2016-2017 era. Caster Chronicles, in particular, set out to kind of combine the magical girl fantasy genre with modern high school life and like slice of life, giving it kind of a unique visual style to set it apart from the other card games being released at the time. The game put a lot of emphasis on deck building. It allowed players to try a wide variety of strategies instead of just forcing everyone into like a small handful of competitive decks like you see with Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! The game launched when Force of Will, however, was already at a period of financial and commercial struggle, which caused a lot of problems with player retention. This gave a lot of players a bad impression of their new games before they had even launched, kind of a theme for the company going forward. They even had one called Architect that I don't believe made it to launch, as far as I know. Force of Will, as a company, is still active today, putting out new sets, but many longtime players I've spoken to feel it's never fully recovered after its peak years. There were a number of problems that led to that, but that's for another video. Caster Chronicles ended, at least in the West, in 2019. I could not find an official cancellation statement from Force of Will specifically explaining why Caster Chronicles ended, but based on the discussion at the time, the game appears to have kind of faded out alongside Force of Will's broader success. Players in Asia kept it alive a few years longer, but it faded out, kind of around the 2022, 2023 into 24. A game can have great mechanics, great art, and even loyal fans, but if the marketing, distribution, and player base kind of start slipping a bit, it's very easy for it kind of just slide off the path and kind of die surprisingly quickly. This game has some cool mechanics. In particular, I'm going to show you kind of a brief overview so you know where we're coming from. So Caster Chronicles itself actually has a bit of a unique gameplay loop. It's nothing you haven't seen before, but it does combine them in a unique way. It's a bit of a combo between Duel Masters and Yu-Gi-Oh! And you'll see what that means as I go forward. Each player starts by making a deck of 50 cards exactly, no more, no less. And each deck is built consisting of casters, servants, and conjurers. There's also a fourth card type called barriers, but those weren't included in the starter deck, so I'm not able to demo these live. I'll post a picture in. Casters represent the magical girls that you are playing as. You will assemble a team of these as they go forward, and what these are your lands. Now, the way the resource in this game works is that once per turn during the call step, which happens right before the main phase, you can take one caster from your hand and either place it in the caster zone or take that caster's next level and play it on top of that caster. Now, each caster has a few things it can do. When you play a card, you must meet its cost in the top left. This is just like Duel Masters. The rule is that you must have at least one tapped mana uh, uh, be the same color as the card you are casting. So if I have one red caster, I can produce one red mana. Now, something that a lot of people complain of when you see Magic is getting mana screwed, which is where Duel Masters came in and solved that issue by letting you take one card from your hand and place it face up in the mana zone as a resource. And what Caster Chronicles does is pretty clever. During that before mentioned call phase, you can either play a caster, or you can take a card from your hand that you don't need and place it face down as a generic mana. And since only one mana has to match, you just need one caster of that color, and then you can pay one generic mana to play an example Explosive Bamboo. Now, when you play a servant, you can play them in either the attack position, which is normal, or what they call reverse, which is upside down, at which point when your opponent attacks it, you compare the defense stat. Now, you can see what this is. This is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Attack and defense positions. And of course, conjures are your instants. They're your one-time magics that you play, just use their effect and discard. and barriers were just like magic that stays in play, right? Now, what's probably the most unique mechanic you're talking about is, of course, the casters themselves. Now all casters have essentially the legend rule where you can only have one in play at a time. So I can't have a level 1 Passion Wing and then play a second level 2 Passion Wing. But what a lot of casters have, let me find one here that has it. Um, like this one here, Sorelia, she has an effect that says tap her, discard a caster, destroy target enemy servant with cost of 1. Now, what this does is all of your casters will have a tap ability, which means you must make a choice between playing a card with them by tapping them for mana or tapping them for their effect, which turns them into a tactical position. So after you've played all your cards, your hand is tapped out. You're never just they're never just worthless sitting there in your back row doing nothing. They actually do have purposes outside of that. But some of them, like this level 2, will just have you discard casters, which means if you have a spare caster in hand, you can discard it to get an effect, which means these casters are always acting as a resource rather than just being kind of a generic mana rock on the back row, which is what a lot of games turn into. Now, the way this game handles life is a lot like Duel Masters. At the beginning of the game, you set out 7 life, or orbs as they call it, and your opponent, whenever they attack you successfully, like if you were to attack me with the exploding bamboo, attack me, I don't have anything to defend with. I place one of those orbs into my hand, right? If you hit me while I have no orbs in my orb zone, I lose the game. It's that simple. Like I said, it's Duel Masters with Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, because of how they handle the casters, their most unique mechanic, it's probably where the game shines, is you do have the break, which is the burst mechanic from Duel Masters. You have the caster effects. I think this allowed for a lot of strategic depth, especially since you only need the 1 mana to match. It became very common for people to tech in casters of another color just for their tap effect, right? Draw a card if you played a spell by its break ability this turn just by tapping it. Since you don't have to discard a matching caster and you don't have to pay mana to put casters into play, it became very easy for you to tech in other colors. I think that was actually one of the places where this game shined. It's where the very open deck building came into play. Unfortunately, much like Force of Will, it had a lot of great ideas, but then didn't kind of execute on things like the competitive scene. They didn't. I know Force of Will didn't ban things fast enough, and we ended up with things like the Panda format. But I think Caster Chronicles had a lot of potential, and I really wish a lot of that it had stuck around a lot longer for that potential to be very much explored and continue to be built upon. But that's the original game, and now we'll get back to talking about the new reboot. The game has been picked up by Speed Robo Games, with CEO Raiden Vasey leading the charge on a 2026 reboot of the game. Speed Robo is mostly known in the indie tabletop and card game circuits for consulting on smaller TCG products and publishing indie games like System Gate and Necromancers. This new version is essentially a full relaunch of Caster Chronicles. Speed Robo appears to be handling the reboot independently without any direct involvement, at least that I could find, from the original Force of Will leadership. The relaunch is also being funded through Kickstarter, which has become kind of a common launch and relaunch platform for indie card games over the last few years. But the new distribution model is where things really get interesting. Instead of using traditional structure for releases where they have starter decks and then large randomized booster sets where you buy packs and peel them open for randomized cards, Reboot is using a much more like slimmed down product line. The game is launching with dual decks where each set has 2 decks of combined between 2 elements to help new players jump in like really quickly. The expansion packs are where things really get different. Instead of a large randomized pool, each pack contains a specific 5-card elemental cluster alongside 2 foil cards. And I have the 2 foil cards, the only randomized ones, and I have some mixed feelings on this. On one hand, it dramatically lowers the cost of entry and makes deck building easier for newer players. But on the other hand, it could significantly reduce the importance of the secondary market and trading scene, which has traditionally been the trading card game. It's definitely an interesting gamble to take. I'll have to see how players respond to the new approach to product distribution, as how popular it is with players in general will be the determining factor at the end of the day of the longevity of this relaunch. Organized play appears to be a stretch goal on their Kickstarter with a large tournament circuit, but I think this needs to be a much more ground floor issue for the game to last. The reboot needs to reach beyond the original audience, as a lot of older Forcible players still have a bad taste in their mouth from the decline of that game. And that reputation can absolutely carry over, even under new management. The artwork is another thing the reboot really needs to take careful interest in. I don't mind fan service in games. I'm a fan of Bayonetta after all, but card games are social hobbies, first and foremost, played in public spaces, with women and minors as each lead secondary audiences. If your artwork regularly makes players uncomfortable showing cards in public, that becomes a genuine barrier to growth. Although I'm fine with spicier art or risque content, there is a line, and the original Caster Chronicles had a bad habit of crossing it a lot. I think the biggest danger is relying too heavily on Kickstarter funding. It's great for gauging audience interest, initial funding, and visibility. But card game needs to find a way to fund itself off on its own profit rather than crowdfunding after launch. It's very common for games to have a very strong launch, especially on Kickstarter, and then have interest die down over time, both as players kind of drift away and as players decide whether they want to commit or not. A lot of games have relied on Kickstarter for each set's funding individually, and this turns the success and interest in each set into a life or death issue for the game, one which doesn't allow for a period of recovery if if a singular set does not do well. At the end of the day, I think the game is in the best hands it can be right now. I think the people at Speed Robo seem to be genuine fans of the game, and many of the decisions and risks taken seem genuinely interesting. Whether players embrace the new distribution model or not has yet to be seen, and will be a key point to keep an eye on. I'd love to hear what you all think down below. I'll be with you all later in the week next with more gaming and entertainment content. Until then, this has been Nathan, otherwise known as Lord Thrash.